Doesn't it? All of my own. Very good. You have your Bible. I'd love for you to take it. And we're in Proverbs 25. You do have the notes there. And I spent a lot of time trying to give clarity of word meanings. And I hope that they are a blessing to you and the amplification of it as well. Sometimes as you're reading Proverbs, you take for granted that you know what it means until you start looking at word meanings, and all of a sudden it opens up like a flower. At least that's my illustration of it. And then you realize, wow, it's got deeper meaning than I realized. And of course, that's because the wisest man that ever lived apart from Christ authored these, and none other than King Solomon. I do want to add one prayer request to your list there, and that would be for Sheila's uncle. His name is Ernie, and we had asked you to pray for Uncle Ernie. He's waiting for a follow-up on cancer as well. So that would be my mother-in-law's last sibling. So, younger brother, yeah. So, you have your notes? Let's do this, all right? We're in Proverbs 25. We're going to begin at verse 11. We've already done verses 1 through 10. I did that last week, and I'm running this tonight, so I need to be getting ahead. So here's where we are. It's an observation on communication. And here's what Solomon wrote. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. When I was growing up, my grandmother had on her coffee table in the living room, which is where you were never supposed to go, but every once in a while at holidays, the living room was open up. Any of you grow up with a room like that? It's like, that's the forbidden room. You know, you just don't go there. I guess it would have been my paternal grandmother. She had a room on the front of her house. It was the living room. I think back then they would have called that where you date. What is that? A parlor, yeah, a parlor. And I think I probably set foot in there like 3 times in all my growing up years. It's just you didn't cross the threshold. It was the point of death if you did. And so, but on my grandmother's table was a book. And on the cover of the book, was a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. I never could figure out what that meant, you know. Sure sounded pretty, but I think we'll figure it out tonight. And then moving on, verse 12, as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. So let's look at this, and I'm going to walk you through it. Here's the first thought then, going with verse 11. Words that fit an occasion are powerful and precious. A word fitting, a well-placed word spoken is like apples of gold or golden apples in pictures of silver. So let me give you some thoughts to go with that. When it comes to using the right word, what are some rules that we would follow that before we say something, there's some things that we need to consider? Think before you speak. What are some others? Is it true? About, is this the right time? Is it beneficial? Is this the right place? Am I speaking to the right person? There's all kinds of things and variables that you should follow before we speak. Now, how many of us do that? I'm not sure. We won't take any personal testimonies tonight on that. But let's go back. A word fitly spoken or a well-spoken word. All right, now some observations. Words, I'm going to give you a phrase. I'm going to let you give me the fill in the blanks. Words have the power to hurt, heal, control. Okay. Anyone else? Destroy, comfort, encourage. So we understand the power of a well-spoken word, right? When we say something, what effect does it have? What does it mean? How will the person receive it? Now, I'm going to give you some thoughts of mine on this. And I personally think that this was probably not golden apples, but apples of gold. If you know one thing about Israel, in some of the farms there, and I can't think of what they call those, but they actually grow fruit. I mean, tangerines and oranges, and they ship them out all over the world until the Jewish people began to resettle in the area. Israel was really a desert wasteland. But since they've been there since, what was it, 1949, I think it was, they have been growing farms, and all of a sudden, once again, as it was prophesied, the desert is blooming again. And it's a pretty wonderful thing to see. So let's go back. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. Now, I'm going to just make a couple of comments to you. One of the great things that a student should learn in school is not just what to think, but what? How to think. That's one of the things that's missing today is rational thought, critical thought. Now, I will admit, Baptist churches tend to have our share of critics, okay? There's always a critic in the crowd. But generally, education historically would have been teaching someone how to think. And then from knowing how to think and how to think rationally and how to make judgments, they would then acquire the ability to make the application of what they have learned. Have you ever seen people, and not necessarily well-educated people, but let's say the late 19th century, the early 20th century, when most of America was still rural, and a lot of education, the majority of education, was almost like a one-room schoolhouse. Have you ever seen the penmanship of people from that era? I mean, when they write, it flows. It looks like artwork. Ours looks like scribble, right? And today's kids, they don't even know how to do cursive writing at all. Forget it. Do we teach that in school? We do. It was the Christian Academy, but I think the public school, none of it, right? I don't even know that they know how to print anymore. But here's what we've lost. A well-spoken word, or we could say a well-written word, or well-thought-out word, is a thing of beauty. It does heal. It does encourage. It does, somebody said, heal. It does wonderful things. In fact, here's the question for you. How much does it cost you to speak a word of encouragement to someone? How much does that cost? Nothing. It doesn't cost anything. But how seldom we spend it. You think about that. How seldom we encourage. So I think that's one of the things I wanted to take away from this. And then there's one other one. In the day in the world of texting, all of a sudden, we've moved away from even using real words to using abbreviated words. The first time I got a text and it said LOL, I couldn't figure out what in the world does that mean. I mean, you know, the kids today, they have hashtags, and I don't even want to start giving the words because I might end up with the wrong explanation and get in trouble. Let's move on. Here's the next thought, verse 2. The rebuke of a wise man is esteemed when received by a tender heart and a listening ear. When I go through these, I try to go through them in such a way that I'll take the sum of what is there and then make it something that is like practical or pointed. So let's look at this. And on your outline, I have the amplification, and this is mine. It's not out of anybody's Bible. Verse 12. As an earring of gold, or as rings of gold is the meaning there, and an ornament of fine pure gold. Now, here's the application. So is a wise, a clever, an experienced, a skillful reprover or judge upon an obedient ear. So what are we to take from that verse? We're to take from that verse this: when you receive the rebuke of a wise man, it should give you pause. a correction from a wise man, this should give you pause. Now, we would have in our society, we will use the expression, well, consider the source. And that's a good point. When you're receiving correction or you're receiving teaching, you ought to consider the source. This person, maybe whose words have wounded me, whose words have hurt me, are they someone that I should invest emotional anxiety over? Are they wise? Do they know what they're talking about? Or do I need to say, consider the source? A lot of times we wrestle with people's words. And we should step back and we should really consider the source. Is this a wise person? Do they evidence discernment and knowledge? Or are they foolish? A lot of times, it's the foolish that wound us. But when the wise speak, we should receive their words with a tender heart, right? And a listening ear. So, tender heart, soft, listening ear, I'm open. I'm listening to what you're saying. Anybody want to add a thought to that? Yeah, go ahead. And of course, their child's always right. Right. Yeah, yeah. So we go back to the consider the source, right? What am I hearing? Is this right? Seek it out. So let me take you to our next thought here. The good news is refreshing. And as one that grew up gardening and all, this kind of resonates with me, so let's read it. As the cold of snow in the time of harvest. Now let's pause there. When do you tend to start harvesting your garden? Is it cold and snowy? No, it's just the opposite, right? It's hot and sweaty. All right, so we're looking at a proverb that's got a contrast that makes you give pause. All right, so let's look at it again. Is the cold of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to them that send him, for he refresheth the soul of his master. Now, how many of you have ever been to Israel or northern Israel? Any of you? Okay, do you remember seeing the perpetual snows? They were on Mount Hermon, right? Did I say it right, Hermon? Southern Lebanon. And it's always there. I can remember when we were on our trip and we went up there. And we went from the desert, and Brian, you would have taken this trip, and we go up, and next thing we know, we're up in the foothills of the mountains. So we've gone from heat, all of a sudden, it's kind of cold up here. And on up above us, as you looked, were the mountain range that you have here. Now, if it's the heat of summer, and you were Solomon, you were staying in your summer palace. Where was your summer palace? It wasn't in Jerusalem. Your summer palace was up in northern Israel. In fact, really southern Lebanon today. Now, I'm the king, and it's the heat of the summer, and they're harvesting. But I can look, and I can see mountains with snow. As the master, I'm probably going to encourage my servants to go up to the mountain and bring back what? Snow. You know, you can with hay and such, you can insulate ice and keep it. So here's the thought of many historians, that as Solomon was writing this, he was actually thinking about the snows that could be put in a drink, a wine or something, and cool it down. For a king, it was a luxury. Now, the application. So we've got the illustration, the cold of snow in the time of harvest. And here's the application. So is a faithful messenger. Now, on your outline, faithful, true, to be trusted messenger, one that is dispatched to them that send him. Let him go that send him out. For he refresheth, he returns the soul of his master. In other words, here is a master. He sent his servant. His servant is gone out. His servant's gone, and now he's coming back with a message. The faithfulness of that servant, not only in carrying out his responsibility, but the faithfulness of that servant in communicating exactly what the master needed to hear, is as refreshing as the snow in the time of harvest. Two thoughts not on your outline. Let me give them to you. Proverbs 25:13 is focused more on the character of the messenger than the content of the message. What is refreshing to the master? A faithful servant, a faithful messenger, right? And then here's another, just as a point of thought as a employer. Faithful employees are as rare as snow in summer. How many of you have employees? You don't have to raise your hand, but we've been there, right? An unfaithful employee, we'll talk about that later in this. Faithful employees are as rare as snow in summer. What do you think? Moving on? Here we go. The sorrow of empty, broken promises. All right, here we go. Proverbs 25 and verse 14. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. Now, when you read these proverbs, you have to admit the truth doesn't immediately hit you, right? It just sounds like, well, that sounds good. So let's look at this. Let's take a moment. So here we go. The sorrow of empty, broken promises. I'm going to walk you through. You've got the outline. Whoso boasteth himself, he celebrates, he commends, he praises himself of a false gift. So I'm promising something, but I'm not going to deliver it. But I'm boasting. All right, let's walk it through. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift, a fake gift, a breach of faith, is like clouds and wind without rain. Now, we look up at the sky and we say, it looks like it's going to rain. What was there about the sky that made you think it was going to rain? All right, the clouds, right? The wind's picking up, the temperature's dropping. I remember being a kid living in the country, and you know, you would get that spring shower, and there was a rainbow. And my dad always said, "Well, the devil's beating his wife tonight." You ever heard that expression before? I don't know where it came from. Obviously, the devil doesn't have a wife, but it was just one of those colloquial country sayings. But let's go back to this. So, clouds and wind without rain. So everything was there. You're expecting it to rain, and it doesn't rain. Now, the application, boasteth himself of a false gift. I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but somebody says, "Honey, you're going to be in my will. I'm going to take care of you, honey." I can assure you, don't cash anything until the money's in your bank. And I could give you so many illustrations over the years, even in my own personal life and my family's life, where things have been promised. And at the last moment, somebody else slides in and it's gone. I will give you one. I had an uncle, Uncle Scott, and Aunt Dina, Uncle Scott and Aunt Dina. He was pretty wealthy for his day. He was a contractor. And Uncle Scott and Aunt Dina, anytime you visited their house as a child, they would always ask, "Honey, come here and give me a kiss, and I'll give you a little piece of money." Well, it was a little piece of money as I look back, but there was always that promise. Well, when I went off to school and I didn't come back home, I went into the ministry. I've shared this in church before. I was supposed to get the home place. You know, aunt and uncle, they had no children at all. So there was no family. It was just my grandmother, who was a sister, and her children. That was all the family that they ever had. So all these years, people doted on my aunt and uncle. They just did. Well, my Aunt Dina, who was a wonderful lady, I was actually nicknamed after her, she passed away first. And guess what my old uncle, now in his, mid-80s or so, guess what he decided to do? To get married. He married the nurse. Before that man landed in the nursing home, she had everything in her name. My aunt and uncle married for, I guess, over 60 years. All that they had ever acquired. She ran a country store, and in World War II, she was working in the missile factory in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Everything. They had never had children, so they had scraped up. They were fairly wealthy. He had the first television in my whole countryside, first television. So on Saturday, people would go to the country store to watch boxing or wrestling on TV. That's what they did, you know. And they had the only gas station around. So they had a lot of means. But, she married him, hardly got him home before she put him in the nursing home. Everything's in her name now. And then she ends up in the nursing home too. But by then it was too late, because she had taken all that belonged to my uncle and had put it in her name, and then in her niece's name. She had no children. And so in a matter of a few months, the wealth of my aunt and uncle, that was, even in their will, was going to be divided up between all these different ones, was wiped out. Boasting a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. The sorrow of broken promises. I've seen that happen over the years. Too often. Too often to even tell you, even in Christian homes, how much that happens. Let's move on. The strength and influence of a kind word. So we're back to words again. Here we go. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Now, you really have to look at word meanings to get this, so let's do that. All right, here we go. By long, extended, forbearing, long-suffering, slow to anger, extending grace, is a prince persuaded. Now, I'm going to stop there. If you're going to appeal to an employer, or you're going to appeal to a leader, does demanding usually work? Huh? No. So in order to appeal to an authority, you have to be what? Forbearing. There's this long suffering. There's this process of trying to convince the employer that you really do need a raise. And you're faithful, and you'll work harder than ever if you can just get that raise. Now, the first time you asked for the raise, the boss may have said, no, not going to happen, gone. But you can come back, and with a forbearing, long-suffering, extending grace, you have hope. So let's look at it again now. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded. Now, adding to that, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Breaketh oneself, breaketh one's strength. Now, a wife tends to learn to soft talk the husband. All right? She can probably get a lot further at getting what she wants with a little bit of honey and a little less vinegar. Scott, does that happen at your house? Does honey work at your house? No? Yeah, she's tough, right? Yeah. A soft tongue breaketh the bone. Not what you demand, but often it's how you ask. Let me give you some other thoughts to go with that. And just some things here. I wrote this in my notes. We would do well to learn the art of biting the tongue, all right? Bite the tongue. Here's another. Patience, long forbearing, a prince is persuaded. And I'll give you a quick illustration. Genesis chapter 32. Jacob is returning with his wives and all of his children, his flocks, everything. I mean, he is a very wealthy man, and he's going back to Canaan. And he knows that his brother, whose name is Esau, as soon as Esau, who had said, I'm going to kill him, as soon as Esau learns that Jacob's coming back into Canaan, there is a fear that wells up within Esau. You might remember that. And so he divided up his family, and he sent the first portion. Before he ever sent his family over, he sent these flocks, these herds, in front of him with some servants. And the servants were to arrive, and I'm going to quote the verse, and give this message to Esau, and I'm going to read it. Thus shall you speak unto my Lord, master, it means Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus. So here is Jacob the trickster, the rascal. He stole his brother's inheritance, and he had to flee for his life. Now he's returning back to Canaan. He knows he's going to face his brother who said, I'm going to kill him. But in the message that he sends to Esau, it was this: my Lord Esau, respect, thy servant, humility, Jacob, thy brother. So go back to this. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded. Esau was basically the king of Edom at this point, the founder of it. And a soft tongue breaketh the bone. There's so many other verses we could look at, but the point is this. What I say and how I say it has a lot to do with how things are going to go for me, right? So when I approach the authority, I approach with a sense of humility, right? And not a demand, because that's not going to go well, but a soft tongue will break the bone or break the will of the master. Let's go on to the next one. Here we go. The wise know when to say no. And here's what the verse reads. Proverbs 25, verse 16. Hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith, and you got to love the graphic, and vomit it. All right? So here's my summary of that, two thoughts. The wise know when to say no. Now, too much of a good thing may make one sick. Now, I grew up, my dad had honey beehives. My grandfather had several beehives. And I did not realize when I was growing up the luxury of fresh honey. You know, I had no idea. There's so many things I look back on from my youth, and it's like, I can't believe that I didn't cherish the moment and just enjoy it for the health and the joy that I was having. Now, let's go with the honey thing here. All right, Solomon warned, and I'm going to read my notes to make this more brief. Eat too much honey, and you risk stomach aches, heaving, gagging, puking, barfing, spewing, and expelling. Now, Brian told me, was it yesterday? You want to share that? What you told me about strawberries? So we go back. Too much of a good thing can do what? It can make one sick. Let me give you some ideas. Well, before I give you my ideas, some of you tell me what is too much of a good thing, and don't you dare say preaching, all right? Don't you dare. But what would be too much of a good thing? Huh? Chocolate? Okay, too much chocolate? I don't even like chocolate, so are you volunteering a confession? Too much money in the wrong hands? Not a good thing. What else is not a good thing? Oh boy. All the scrapes from the yeah. So the pig trough was an ice cream special, and if you could eat the whole thing, you got it for free. You ever see anybody do it? Too much ice cream's not a good thing. So let's go back to this with the honey. The wise know when to say no. The problem is we're sometimes not so wise, right? You ever? I don't. Do they even have buffets anymore? Is there still a Golden Corral and those things? All right. Do you remember when you were younger? Do you remember? And it was an all-you-can-eat. I remember when we were in college. I don't know if that's happened when you were up in school there, but there was a restaurant. I can't remember the name of it, but it was all-you-can-eat. And these college guys would go in there and they would literally eat the restaurant out of business, and to the point they finally said, "That's it." Throwing, throwing them out because they were just stuffing themselves. Well, you can get away with that when you're young, can't you? But too much of a good thing. I think, do I have on this slide here? No. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that was the name of it. Yeah, Brian reminded me that the name of it was Sir George, but all the college guys called it Sir Gorge. We're going to come back to the honey. It's later in this message, so let's keep going. Proverbs 25:17, warning, a little of you may go a long way. A little of you may go a long way. Let's look at it. Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee and so hate thee. You ever have anybody come over to your house for a visit and you thought, they're never going to leave, right? They stayed and they stayed, and when they finally left, you looked at your spouse or you looked at your kids and you said, I thought they were never going to leave. Little of you may go a long way. Let me give you a little bit of background as a kid of the late 50s and early 60s. When I was growing up, you didn't have much on TV. Television was 3 channels, right? It was Channel 9, Channel 10, and I think Channel 3. And then when I was in early junior high, there was actually a UHF channel. So there wasn't cable, there wasn't any of those things back then. So you know what kids did? We played outside all the time. Every home had a front porch. And you know, in the cool of the evening, people would sit on their front porch. And neighbors might walk by, neighbors might drive by. It was not unusual for people to have company, you know? Do they even use that word in this culture anymore? We've got company, you know? So go back to this guy here. It's a wise thing that you remember a little of you may go a long way. And so withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house. And you've got a little bit of the word meanings here. Withdraw, take back, gather, bring thy foot from your neighbor's house, lest he have enough of thee, weary of thee, and so hate thee. I wrote this in my notes. It's better to leave too early than it is to stay too late. All right, don't you love, I love Proverbs. You know, it's just so practical. And you think, wow, you know, it's so neat how the wisdom is wrapped up in a phrase. Let's look at the next one. Here are 3 characters you should avoid. 3 characters you should avoid. And here's the first one. The first one is a false witness, a false witness. Here's what the Bible says. A man that bears witness, bears false witness against his neighbor is a maul, a mallet, a hammer, a sledgehammer, and a sword, a knife and a dagger, and a sharp arrow. Now, here's the question. Why would a false witness be like being hit with a sledgehammer, pierced through with a sword, or pierced with an arrow? Why characterize a false witness in that way that is like death, is what it's indicating? Right. A false witness steals your integrity, ruins your testimony. Somebody else, any other thoughts? Yeah, Jen. Say it again. The pain of the hurt. Yeah. You know, I think as believers, we almost become desensitized in the sense that we have trust, and there's almost like an openness, you know. But the world will teach you real fast. Words, they'll use words and cut your throat. Huh? Many times you don't see it coming. So a false witness, he will nail you. Let me see if there's anything else I had here in my notes here. There's another verse you might want to write down. Proverbs 14 and verse 5. A faithful witness will not lie. A faithful witness will not lie. A false witness will utter lies. Now, here's the thought with Proverbs 14:15. A faithful witness never lies. And a false witness will sometimes tell the truth, but they will lie. So, once someone has lied to you, do you ever blindly trust them again? No, because you know they've got the character of a false witness. Does it mean you don't love them? Of course you love them. But your radar's up, right? Radar's up. So let me go on to another thought. A dishonest man. So we have a false witness, three characters you should avoid. One, avoid the false witness. By the way, a false witness, if he will lie about someone to you, he will probably lie about you. All right, moving on. A dishonest man. Proverbs 25, verse 19. Confidence in an unfaithful man. Remember earlier we had the faithful messenger? Now here's the unfaithful one. Confidence in an unfaithful man, a deceitful, a treacherous man, in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. Now the foot there could be the foot, the leg, the knee, but you know, here it is, the foot. All right, so how many of you have ever twisted an ankle? Okay. You remember how you got around after that? Kind of hobbling along. I had a knee replacement, Pastor Barber, maybe some of you have had, and your knee would go out of joint. And it was painful, painful. So let's go back. I want to ask you how many have had a broken tooth, because, you know, when horses' teeth go bad, you just take them out and shoot them. So, all right. Proverbs 25, verse 19. Confidence in an unfaithful man in a time of trouble. Now, here's the thought. When we experience trouble, trauma, emotional trouble, you probably confide in somebody, right? Somebody calls, you call somebody comforts you. Even in a time of trouble, you have to be careful where you put your confidence. Because confidence in an unfaithful man is as painful as a broken tooth or a foot out of joint. Anybody want to add words of wisdom to that? Moving on, here we go. Third kind of man to avoid. So we have the false witness, we have a dishonest man. Now the third is a callous man with an insensitive heart. Let's look at this. As he that taketh away a garment in cold weather. I lived in Michigan for 7 years of missionary appointee to the Yankees. I didn't have winter clothes, and I desperately needed them, right? So we both did. So, I mean, I can remember the first time the kids said, "You want to go tubing?" So we moved from South Carolina to Michigan in January. And the kids said, "Do you want to go tubing?" Any of you know what tubing is? Some of you do, okay. And they hit a hill not too far away. It's on John R. Road, I think it was at the time, and probably 10 mile or 11 mile, yeah. And I remember going, and I thought I was going to freeze to death. I had a winter jacket, but it wasn't prepared for that kind of winter. That was a winter like I had never experienced before. So let's go back. He that taketh away a garment in cold weather. You're not gonna take off your coat in the kind of cold winter I was talking about. Now, is vinegar upon nitra, I believe it is, which I think is a potash, a baking soda. So basically, it's the idea of pouring vinegar on potash. Potash, I think, they used to make soap from potash, and I think fertilizer also, I think. Anyway, taking vinegar and the potash and putting them together apparently ends up destroying both. So neither one has any value. It's not of any good. So we've got taking away a garment in cold weather, not smart. Mixing vinegar with nitra is not a good thing because neither of them are of any value. And then it ends with this interesting thought. So is he that singeth songs to a heavy heart. Now, can anybody think of a king, a king that had a musician come in and play songs for him to comfort his heart? All right, David was brought into the palace to play for Saul. Now, the question is, did the music of David solve Saul's heart problem? No. So, let's look then. A callous man with an insensitive heart is he that takes away a garment in cold, which is something you wouldn't want to do, as vinegar is upon nitra, which ruins them both. So now the application is he that singeth, and we would say, cheerful songs to a heavy heart. Now, does it comfort the heavy heart? Well, it does temporarily, but it doesn't solve the heartache. Doesn't solve the heartache. One of the things, and I think you have to learn this by experience, when you go into a hospital room or you go into a room and someone's dying, that there are some things that should be said and there are some things that should not be said. Agree? All right. Now, as a pastor, and I know that somebody is dying, there are things that should be said. And maybe there are things that, not because I'm a pastor, but something that we as believers ought to say for someone who is dying. But what that person doesn't need is to come in cheerful and say, "Oh, you look so beautiful today, Brian, and you're sick as a dog and you're dying," you know. What comfort is there in that? That's a lie, you know. So my point is in all this is this. A wise man knows what to say and when to say it. And here's something that's hard to learn. And sometimes it's better not to say anything because being there is more important than what you said. You know, when I was young in ministry and I would go into places, and sometimes there were people I didn't even know that I was going to meet. And I can remember working in my mind what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it, and you know, all that anxiety. And I learned later it was more important to have been there than it was in what I said. A callous man with an insensitive heart. We should develop a heart that is what? Sensitive, right? A heart that's sensitive. Moving on. There's a lot I could go on that, and I won't. Proverbs 25, 21, and 22. Make peace with an enemy. Let's see what the Bible says. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, And the Lord, Yahweh, eternal God, shall reward thee. Now, does that sound familiar to anyone? You ever heard those verses before? All right, on the Sermon on the Mount, Christ quoted these words. Paul, in his letter to the church at Rome, to the believers in Rome, quoted these same words. So let's break it down. You have your outline there. First of all, let's address what is an enemy. An enemy, and you look at the amplification, an enemy is anyone who hates you, desires to injure you. All right? If thine enemy be hungry, if he craves for food, giving bread to eat, and that bread, the word bread there can be fruit, meat, it's basically feed him. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. Now, for thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head. And the Lord, Yahweh, eternal God, shall reward thee. Now, who is thee? Thee is the one that gave the enemy food to eat and water to drink. So, sometimes somebody will say, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill them with love. Now, an enemy that you tried to kill with love is going to have one of two responses. They're either going to resent you or they're going to repent. The coals of fire is an illustration of God's judgment. So, it's not I'm heaping coals of fire on their head as much as it is by my worthy, righteous response to an enemy. I am doing my part to give him, that enemy, to the Lord. Let the Lord heap coals of fire on his head, not me, because I'm going to have my reward for doing the right thing. That makes sense? Anybody want to add a thought to that? Oh, giving food to eat and giving water to drink. That's the right thing to do. And then in showing grace and compassion, you turn him over to the Lord. The Lord deals with him. A lot of times, I think if we do feeding our enemy and giving him drink with almost a spirit of vengeance or vengeful spirit, God's not going to honor that, right? Our vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. So my job isn't to take a shovel and heap hot coals on somebody's head. My job is verse 21, to give my enemy food and give him water. And then knowing God will reward me. Okay? Greg? Basic. Yep. Absolutely. So really, verse 21 is basic necessities of life. Basic necessities of life. Anyone else? Yeah, Randy? Mm. Oh, yeah. A hammer. Right. And God rewards us for doing what? For being faithful. Faithful to him. Becca? Even though you're beyond the break, but that's okay. You should have listened to your husband. See, you got pointed out and you're broadcast over the internet. Her name is Jackson. Or anybody? No, go ahead. Yeah. 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 That's a great illustration. Yeah. Wow. That's a good story. Yeah. One of the things I would say to you in life is that this opportunity of verse 21 is always there for us. Always. There's always a need. Yeah. 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 Sheila said by doing verse 21, you don't build up a bitter spirit. You've done the right thing. And there are a lot of times in life and ministry, and I think Pastor Barbara would tell you that you just you do the right thing, even everything in you said this is not right, but I still got to do the right thing. Mm. Yep. 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 Yeah. What do you do when an enemy doesn't want to make peace? You just you keep doing verse 21 and let the Lord deal with them. Did you have your hand up? I demand that you show grace. It wasn't toward me, was it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, one wonderful thing about life is you always get an opportunity to give grace, right? Let's move on. I know I need to wrap this up. Turn the other cheek. Now, I'm going to give a confession. Proverbs 25:23. I can't figure this out. I have wrestled with this, and so I don't like what I've got there. So it's one of those things that if I ever publish these notes, I'm going to have to go back. The north wind driveth away rain. Now, I know what that means. Some of my many commentaries says that the rain in Israel comes from the south, and the north wind brings in the heat and drives the rain away. But then I have another commentary says that the rain comes from the north, and so it's like I'm going to go to Israel just to figure this out. And then verse 23, so doth an angry countenance a biting tongue. So the question uh, is that angry countenance a good thing to shut down a backbiting tongue? Um, if that's what it means. And so I'm not going to teach this anymore on that because I still haven't figured it out, but I'm going to study it. So moving on. I like this slide. You've seen it more than once. A man married to a contentious wife will have no joy. Now, for those that are just in the class for the first time, I've already taught this, and so I'm not going to spend any time there. And since there's a lot more women in here, I'm going to rise above temptation. So Better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. So I have taught that, but I'm not going to teach it tonight because I've already taught it. There. All right, here we go. Verse 25. Good news is to the spirit what cold, fresh water is to the soul. That's my interpretation. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. That's pretty well self-explanatory, isn't it? You know, you ever get hot, you're sweaty, you're perspiring, your throat is parched, and then you get a drink of cool water. There was two, I don't know if they were widow ladies or, I don't know. They were living up at the top of a hill down below my house, and they had in their front yard an old well. Probably had been there forever, you know. Back in those days, the wagons were using the same road and all. And I can remember going down there and looking down in that cavernous hole of a well, and there was always the community tin cup that was there, the ladle, and dropping that, and you let the bucket drop down and hear it hit the water, sploosh, and raise it back up. And there was something about water from the deep well that was just delicious. So anyway, take my word for it. All right, verse 26. Righteous men falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. So here's my interpretation. A good man compromising his integrity is as offensive as muddy water from a spring. A righteous man, a man that has had a testimony of godliness and good character and walking in the way of righteousness and keeping the law and keeping the commandments, whose testimony has been impeccable. But such a man, in perhaps an hour of temptation, falling down and humbling himself before the wicked, is as a troubled, dirty, muddy fountain and a corrupt spring. If you've ever gone hiking, there used to be, now it's waters are so polluted, but up in the mountains and all, and water's running over the rocks and they're running down the hills, and you would know that you could get fresh water, a moving stream. One thing you did not want to drink water from was where the sheep or the cows or whatever livestock is up the stream, and the water is flowing from them all the way down to you. That is a problem. And so it is, how distasteful it is when good men bow to wicked men. 27, I'll wrap it up in 3 minutes. Verse 27, we're back to honey. Self-promotion and self-glory are to others what too much honey is to the stomach. All right, what's the question? Too much honey to the stomach will make you sick. All right, here we go. Verse 27. It is not good to eat much honey. So for men to search their own glory is not glory. I read this in my notes for the sake of time. I doubt there's been a day when men were more self-consumed than our day. Our society is addicted to image and obsessive in pursuit of making a name. And then the thought, likely, like honey consumed in excess makes one sick. Pursuit of one's glory brings one to the same ignoble end. Sick, heartsick, disappointed, and left wanting. Too much self-consumption, and we make others want to vomit. You ever been around anyone like that? They're so consumed with themselves that you might have, even when you were younger, walked away and went like that to a friend, they make me sick. Here's what honey can do. I've got one more verse, right? Honey, it can increase your blood sugar level. Honey has sugar and carbohydrates. Honey can lower blood pressure. It can lead to stomach issues. It can lead to weight gain. Honey can also pave the way for dental problems. So, it is not good to eat much honey. And so for men to search for their own glory is not glory. Last one. Like a city without walls, an undisciplined man is vulnerable and self-destructive. Proverbs 25, verse 28, he that hath no rule, and you see it on the notes there, he that hath no rule, no control, no restraint over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down. Now, a town would have been a place without walls. A city would have been a place with walls. Is like a city that is broken down and without walls. One of the things that you want parents to teach their children when they're young is to teach their children self-discipline, right? You know, they say, well, my kid just acts that way. No, your kid acts that way because you've not taught them to discipline themselves. And so, anyway, anybody a comment as we close? No? Are you leaving here a little wiser, I hope? I love this. So, Lord willing, my wife and I, so this is chapter 25, so I have 6 more chapters to go. And I cannot find anywhere where there are notes like this out there. And it's so politically incorrect, I think it would be popular with believers. So anyway, let's pray. Lord, bless our night as we go from this place. How we thank you for truths. Lord, that the common sense Solomon exercised, well nigh 3,000 years ago. It's amazing, Lord, that it's the same we need to hear today. May we not only be hearers of the word, I pray, may we be doers. In Christ's name, amen. God bless.